Good morning, all, and welcome to our webinar on smart charging and real-world applications. My name is Simbiat Yusuf, Member Relations Manager here at Forth, and I will be moderating this panel this morning. Attendees, we want to make sure that you please submit your questions through the attendee chat. We will get through those questions during our Q&A after all of the speaker presentations today. We will also be sending out the webinar recording and slide deck after the presentation, so don't worry if you miss anything. We will be sending you that information in our webinar recap. And a little bit about Forth for some of our newer attendees. Forth, we are a nonprofit trade association advocating for smart transportation. We work in four main focus areas, which are industry development, demonstration projects, advocacy, and consumer engagement. If you would like to learn more about Forth, our membership program, our events, and our projects, you can visit us at forthmobility.org, and that will have a lot of the information. And are you registered for the National eMobility Equity Conference, which will be taking place November 12th and 13th? We are now 50 days away, and government and nonprofit attendees can now access the eMobility Equity Conference free of charge. To find out more information about that, you can find information at our forthmobility.org, and we will include more information on our webinar recap as well. Roadmap. The annual Roadmap Conference sponsorship and registration are now open. The Roadmap Conference will return into an in-person event June 29th through the 30th of 2021. We are closely monitoring the COVID-19 situation to make sure we're ensuring the safety and well-being of our attendees. And look forward to some news coming up in the coming weeks. We will be announcing our call for proposals. So if you have any projects, any case studies that you would be interested in presenting at the Roadmap Conference, our call for proposals will be opened shortly. Our speakers today include Annie Gilleo, Policy and Market Development Manager at Greenlots, Eric Huang, Program Manager at Forth, and Ross Mueller, Future Grid eMobility Senior Business Developer at Siemens. Eric serves as a program manager at Ford to promote electric vehicle adoption. His work focuses on building codes and policies that promote EV readiness in residential and commercial buildings. He holds an MPA in Public Policy Analysis and a Master of Science in Environmental Science and Energy from Indiana University, and is a proud nerd of clean technologies and cars. Annie manages Greenlots policy, regulatory, and government affairs engagement in the Eastern United States and Canada. Her work focuses on transforming the electric sector by unlocking investment opportunities for electric vehicles infrastructure. Prior to joining Greenlots, Annie led the state policy program for the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, conducting research and organizing board coalitions of stakeholders to advance energy efficiency and increase energy affordability. She also spent time at the White House Council for Environmental Quality, held an Environmental Defense Fund Climate Corps Fellowship at the Smithsonian Institute, and served as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Gambia, West Africa. Ross is a 21-year veteran of the Siemens family and has worked within many automation and software markets. He excels in discussing smart solutions for infrastructure, energy metering, discrete machinery, process control, energy software solutions, and networks. Over the last 18 months, Ross has transitioned to eMobility market sector to help Siemens build a solid business foundation within the EVSP space. Russ works closely with all facets of the eMobility business unit internally in order to deliver a high-quality message to potential clients. Siemens offer a complete plug-to-grid solution level 2 transit. And with that, I will pass it along to our first speaker. Here's a brief overview of all of the things we'll be discussing today. And attendees, again, please be sure to submit all your questions through the attendee chat. We will get through them. And if we're not able to get through them, we'll send some in the recap email as well. And now we'll hear from our first speaker, Eric. Eric, take it off.
Thank you very much, Cindy. Thank you very much for the introduction. And before I jump into the introduction of the projects, I'd like to just mention why it's important to talk about home charging really quick. I generally talk about charging infrastructure in three major categories: public charging, workplace charging, and then home charging. Home charging is a very important factor that could accelerate EV adoption thanks to the convenience and the unique sense of safety that there's always a charger at home that you can rely on. So just want to mention that also the latest International Energy Efficiency Code has also put languages requiring EV readiness in new developments of the buildings as well. So that's going to make it a lot more important of an aspect to look into in terms of how can we help the densely populated MUD to adapt to this new change towards electric vehicle adoption and EV readiness, and make it more accessible to those who don't live in or own a single-family home here. Now, I'd like to just focus on a conversation back to the DOE-funded project that Ford is currently working with CSE, Center for Sustainable Energy, and also energetics in the area of Clean City Coalitions. I'll be covering the introduction of the project, an overview of our preliminary results in terms of qualitative and quantitative analysis of the baseline data for MUD charging, and also an overview of the technologies that we will be demonstrating during this project. So, project introduction. Assuming I can move this. Okay, it's working. Awesome. So project objective, firstly, is to engage stakeholders to determine that what kind of barriers there are for MUD charging implementation. And then after engaging stakeholders, analyzing the baseline, we want to be able to demonstrate some innovative technologies that will address these barriers specifically. And then we want to compile the project's finding into a toolkit that's going to actually facilitate future installations as well. And then finally, we want to disseminate this toolkit far and wide so people can benefit from this research. The impact on barriers that we are envisioning is through majorly three steps. One is to collect and analyze data on existing MUD charging utilization. So we're looking at charging session data in a few minutes. And then we are also hoping to demonstrate some new technologies that actually reduces MUD charging initial costs or future costs, and also ease the management barriers, because sometimes it could be difficult to manage charging stations if you don't necessarily have someone looking over the charger and patrolling the place a lot. And there are technologies that will alleviate those needs. And then lastly is to combine all those learnings and create an outreach tool that engages MUD owners, managers, and residents all together to facilitate a conversation that's going to help them create a program that's going to be cost efficient and also easy to use, that brings or improve the overall user experience. So quickly, I'd like to introduce you to the baseline analysis that we have done in the past budget period. Basically, we have looked at things in two major categories. One is quantitative and the other one is qualitative. For the quantitative ones, it's outlined here in blue font, is that we are looking at level 2 or above in terms of charging sessions that we're able to collect. We are looking at the charging that took place at or near an MUD location. And then we are also looking for specific patterns in terms of charging station usage. And then in terms of qualitative analysis that we have done, that is noted in the green font, is that we looked at MUD decision-making process. We want to understand how our charging stations decisions being made, and then also what are the barriers currently present for the MUD charging implementation. So diving right into the data analysis or the quantitative analysis that we have done. So the project team was able to collect over 500,000 charging sessions from over 1,400 ports throughout 2015 to 2020. The project partner Energetics, they actually did a series of analysis to the data set that we received, and they also done a lot of data clearing and usage analysis. As you can see in the table, during the data clearing, we had to remove many of the outliers provided with us because they have either abnormal average power, very small energy delivered, or just extremely short plug-in sessions. So we have to remove those sessions and make sure the data that we have kept in the data set are relevant. And the results, the final results, is that we have 223 ports located at MUDs with more than 23,000 sessions for us to analyze. So looking at first the analyzed results for MUD charging located at the MUDs, we see an increased annual usage over 2015 to 2020, which is to be expected because more people are driving plug-in electric vehicles. And then on the left-hand side, we see a distribution. On the lower left-hand side, we see a graph showing the distribution of charging duration. And we see a lot of the actual charging took place or lasted around 2.5 to 5 hours. And then when we look at the upper right-hand side, we can see a distribution graph of plug-in duration versus charging duration. And we are able to see that many cars were actually plugged in for more than 10 hours when the actual charging duration lasted maximum about 10, 12 hours, meaning a lot of people are plugged in without moving their cars, and the charger are no longer delivering energy, even though they're plugged in. And then on the lower right-hand side, we see an energy delivered for longer and shorter plug-in sessions are very similar, meaning that for a longer plug-in session versus a shorter plug-in session, the actual energy delivered are very similar. Hence, there's an opportunity that we can actually increase the utilization rates by maybe motivating people or mobilizing people to unplug their cars and move on and allow more people to charge, hence increasing the utilization rates of the already in place electrical capacity. And then we also looked at MUD supporting level 2 chargers, and we can see a similar usage pattern in terms of increased annual usage throughout the years. And then in terms of charging duration, actual charging duration distribution, it's very similar to MUD located chargers. However, when we look at the on the right-hand upper side, we see the overlapping of charging session and plug-in session highly overlapping with each other, meaning that people are actually moving their cars after they're done. And the similar story here on the lower left side as well is that highly overlapping graph of longer versus shorter in terms of plug-in duration in terms of energy delivered. Hence, it's telling us that for the public chargers maybe that's supporting MUD buildings, they actually have a higher efficiency in terms of energy delivery because people are actually moving their cars more frequently. And this is the kind of behavior or scenario that we're actually trying to encourage. And we found this is a really interesting opportunity that we should try to go for. So after the quantitative side, we also looked at the qualitative analysis for baseline. So for the baseline data aggregation, we actually look at the MUD decision-making process. So we realized that, or we found apartment buildings are much simpler because the process only needs to go through the owner and the manager. But for the condominiums, because of the HOA's existence, it's more complicated and sometimes political because you need to go through the HOA to actually make this kind of amendment or change to the building. And then lastly, key barriers identified. We have found that these are the 4 major areas of barriers that we want to address. So education awareness, this is huge. We want to make sure everybody is fully educated to make the right decision. Financial barriers, because initial costs, ongoing costs with charging stations. And then electrical preparedness barriers, that's related to the buildings being more prepared or not for charging stations, electrically speaking, because that could be potentially another cost. And then finally, the building physical design barriers. This is where the building itself would necessarily be able to accommodate or not charging stations. Finally, this is a checklist or a number of responses that we have collected so far through our project outreach interview with the stakeholders around the nation. And we see the highest rated or highest number of responses, as mentioned, HOA related and information or education related barriers here. So these are the focus areas for our toolkits. And then moving into the innovative charging infrastructure pilot project or plan, I'd like to quickly show you that the finalized technologies that we have listed here. So I'd like to just highlight a few. Number one is EVI, Electric Vehicle Institute. It's actually going to be a conversion of gas station into EV-only charging stations that's serving a few MUDs around site. So that looks more like a gas station type of concept, but for EV charging. And then for XL Energy EV Match I like to just at Open Connect, I like to highlight that these are smart charging technologies that actually helps dumb charger to have low cost network capabilities, which is great. And then for PowerFlex, here I like to just mention that they're actually a power management system that's actually going to be helpful to make sure that you don't have to spend a lot of money to increase your building's electrical capacity to accommodate for more chargers. And finally, I just want to mention Plug-in Liberty, AmpUp, and FreeWire technologies. These are the three technologies we're still looking for site hosts. So if you have any suggestions, please feel free to let us know. And I have to wrap this up real quick for the following speakers. But if you have any more questions, please feel free to ask me in the chat box or send us an email. And thank you very much. And just want to make sure if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eric. And attendees, again, please be sure to submit your questions through the attendee chat. And next, we'll hear from our second speaker, Annie.
Great, thank you. So today I'm going to talk about smart charging, of course, what it is and how Greenlots sees smart charging delivering benefits to customers in different market segments. A bit about Greenlots before I really dive in. Greenlots is a technology company and an EV charging service provider. Our technology brings together cutting-edge network management software, integrated charging optimization, grid balancing services, and of course, a driver-friendly mobile app in a single platform. Greenlots supports a significant percentage of the DC fast charging infrastructure in North America and also a growing number of level 2 chargers. Our customers are typically larger organizations that place relatively more value on software management. So that includes utilities, fleets, automakers, cities, and so forth. And I think that sort of business to business approach does set us apart from other infrastructure companies who may take more of a retail sales or direct consumer facing approach. So today I'm going to talk through our smart charging capabilities at a variety of different levels and then close with a few examples of the ways that we're seeing smart charging playing out in the field. Before I dive into that, I wanted to just kind of give you an overview of the services that we provide. Everything from site identification to design to hardware procurement to installation and maintenance. So we really are a turnkey EV charging provider, but today I'm going to focus on just that middle part, the software component, which is the product that Greenlots makes and really is at the core of what smart charging is. I am not seeing the slide advance on my screen. Let's see, there we go. Looks like a bit of a lag. Okay, so I hope that you're all looking at this slide, smart charging for site load management. Smart charging is a really broad term, so I thought it would be helpful to walk through a few different ways that we see our customers leverage smart charging capabilities. At its most basic level, smart charging gives a site host data, right? How much power is being used, when cars are charging. It also enables control, so setting prices and varying those prices, for example. On this slide, I've tried to capture some of the smart charging capabilities that can help customers manage load at their site. So, for example, an individual site can contain load while ensuring charging needs are still met. Power can be shared and prioritized across charging stations at an individual site, and charging can also be scheduled to help avoid times of higher electricity costs. We know that high demand charges can be a major cost to site hosts and fleets if strategies aren't put in place to manage around those demand charges. So the load management strategies that I've laid out here can help fit a larger station deployment into existing grid or site capacity as well without triggering upgrades, since you're able to manage and smooth overall load through planning and technology-enabled load management. So site station managers, for example, can set a power ceiling below the demand charge threshold during peak demand times to ensure power use never exceeds that ceiling. Now, the final thing I have here is just integrated distributed energy resources and storage as a smart charging capability. In my view, EV charging is in and of itself a distributed energy resource. It's an effective tool to shape and shift load. So what I'm really talking about here is pairing several distributed energy resources together. Smart charging can help integrate additional DERs at a single site, solar, storage, and that's really important, especially for fleets who may have constraints on their charging schedules and need additional solutions to manage costs associated with demand charges. I think that's a good segue to the next slide, which is specifically about fleet management and smart charging for fleets. Of course, fleets can lean on network software to help them link charging activity to other capabilities, billing, payment, for example, tracking and reporting of costs. The sky is really the limit here when it comes to linking smart charging to other fleet needs and functionalities. You could just link your charging software to a fleet management system to do things like optimizing routes and tracking assets. So I do think that fleets are a particularly good use case for load management because typically they have known routes and known usage patterns. On the flip side, of course, they may have constraints if they need to be on the road regularly, regardless of rates or charging. And so that is where pairing with distributed energy resources can be a really effective tool. Something that I talk about quite often in my job is the way that smart charging can really be a utility scale functionality. Electrification is a major opportunity for reducing emissions, lowering system-wide costs for all ratepayers, but that's only if we're able to manage the growing load on the grid in such a way that minimizes the need for new capacity. And that's really where smart charging comes in, right? Utilities are responsible for providing customers with around-the-clock, reliable energy to meet daily electricity needs. And although they do a great job matching energy supply with expected demand, there are also times when the electrical grid can be strained during high use periods. EV charging is a really valuable, flexible load that technology can help manage, right? As more and more EVs hit the road, we want to be leveraging those capabilities and being able to plan and control how much electricity is used at a given time. I've listed some examples here of electric vehicle demand response strategies. I do want to just be clear that demand response doesn't just mean turning on and off charging, right? It can mean throttling power levels up and down. Load management can also be more localized than system-wide, right? If there are certain areas of the grid that are experiencing constraints, a utility can address that specific area through load management at a specific time. And load management can also be used as a complement to rates. So we often think of time of use rates as an effective tool for managing when people charge their vehicles. But at the same time, if you have big changes in rates, that will impact behavior in such a way that potentially all of the electric vehicles start charging at the same time, and you see spikiness in overall electricity load. You can use technology to help smooth that spikiness, bringing cars online, in a more smooth pattern. So I have just a couple of minutes left, and I did promise case studies, so I wanted to leave you with a few. I've tried to illustrate a few different geographies and use cases here. I'll just point to a few. The first is Hawaiian Electric Company. They have deployed utility-owned public fast charging in public places. We've worked with them to support a station that includes integrated storage, which limits the total draw from the grid. So although cars are able to charge at 50 kilowatts, the overall draw from the grid is limited to 23 kilowatts, with the additional energy being powered by backup storage. HECO has also developed a pilot focused on demand response to public DC fast charge, which I think is a use case that we don't often see, and that includes power throttling as opposed to on-off. Southern California Edison's Charge Ready program is another good example. Greenlots is one of 5 communication vendors in that program. SoCal Edison sends event parameters the day ahead, and then load control signals call for 50% reduction. They offer incentives for increasing load during certain times of the day, and then use control signals to reduce charging capacity during certain times of the day. And they've seen some pretty impactful results from that. And finally, SDG&E, also in California, has a Power Your Drive program that I think is a great example of technology and load management really facilitating complex rate structures. SDG&E supports level 2 stations at workplaces and MUDs, and uses hourly rates that are published day ahead from California ISO, and then uses technology to help drivers easily respond to those hourly rates by setting maximum willingness to pay. So I'm going to wrap it up there. There are a lot of opportunities to manage charging, and I've highlighted a few projects here, but there are, of course, many others out there. We haven't yet gotten to the point where managing charging is a clear policy directive. We're really just at the beginning. So I think if I would leave you with anything, it's that there is a lot of untapped opportunity in this area, and we really need to be steering policy and programs in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annie. And finally, we'll hear from Ross.
Hello. I'm glad everybody's here. We're going to dive right into it. So without having to give you an overview of who Siemens is in the world, we feel that our branding and our reputation for the last 147 years in industry precedes itself. So what we like to offer, and what we do offer, the EV marketplace, is a plug-to-grid solution. So when we look at a project, whether it happens to be residential or it happens to be government-oriented, we look at the hardware. We can work with design and build. We can work in the software area, and also, of course, provide services from utility down to the plug-in point. And that we feel is very critical and provides an overall solution. Real briefly, the portfolio that assists in the EV market, we cover the whole broad spectrum of level 2 charging, level 3, and then the MDHD marketplace, so that we can assist battery electric bus applications and assist our customers. A little bit of a different approach for Siemens, and we take an approach that can be very specific and also is going to be very different. So we look at the EV market in level 2. We look at it, certainly the residential market is a very viable market. MUDs, shopping centers, wherever the electrical charging infrastructure is going to be. With our Generation 3 charger just released, you can see that the kilowatt hour delivery has been upped from the traditional 7.2 up to 11.5. But when you look over at the commercial side, we will be providing a charger that's not only a charger, but it's actually an asset on a network. And that's the way that we want to look at it. And that's the way that we look at a lot of our equipment, is serving the overall network and the overall asset structure in say, a smart building. There's a couple of different ways to connect, and it's interesting to understand. It's interesting to understand when you connect a charger. I'm going to go back. That you can do it certainly from a traditional Wi-Fi perspective. The charging infrastructure can be also connected hardwire via Ethernet, and that offers up a lot of opportunities for expanding your network. And of course, and they're all OCPP compliant, and you can Wi-Fi OCPP through what we call a parent gateway. So what we're doing is we're adopting charger assets and charger products into a network connectivity that allows flexibility in your application. And we'll talk about those here in a minute. Here's one specific example where we can integrate a traditional bus data platform in an EV charger. And so what does that do for you? If you're a client that has a building, let's say for instance you want to have that building privatized on the network, which is very important in many industries, we can connect that charger on that building network as an asset and pull data streams directly into, let's say, the building automation systems, so that when you are doing control of any kind and you're looking at assets, energy assets, not only the chargers, you can see that through your traditional, we'll either say your building automation systems or your SCADA systems, in addition to the EV platforms as well. So what that does is allows Siemens as a company to actually consult multiple different industries to assist in EV charging. So whether you're charging a vehicle that is on your campus for your employees, or it's a work vehicle, or it's a fleet vehicle, our charging infrastructure will provide many different ways to look and deploy these solutions. So as an example in the level 2, so here's a high-rise building. All these high-rise buildings that we work on in many, many different parts of the country have a lot of parking. And over the years that I've worked in these buildings, we used to see 1 or 2 EV chargers. Now we're seeing in this example 61 chargers that are going to be installed in these parking garages, and we all know that's going to go up. So again, we provided a unique value with a value-conscious pricing model and the options that the client wanted. And we worked with them not only on the building infrastructure, so we provide all the building infrastructure and all the way down to the charging. So we could do building automation, we can connect charging, we do all the power distribution from the utility. So when we're working with an end user or client, we can have discussions from all those different arenas. So the next thing is we're going to jump into just the fleets and depots. These are really becoming popular. We're seeing a lot of activity in these markets. And when you look at an e-depot or a fleet that's going to be created for a large company, again, we're looking at the power distribution. We look at the charging infrastructure, and then the energy. We can look at the energy management portion of that as well. So I'm missing a slide, but this was a use case that we had just secured, and we've gone through the submittal process with the city and county of Honolulu for their first BEB station. And yeah, we're pretty proud of this project. It has 9 power cabinets and 25 dispensers for their initial deployment of BEBs in Honolulu. And this is also one of the first projects that we're doing with Gillig. So when you look at projects and you look at the infrastructure that we're going to have to work on within this facility, some of the common things that we've discussed are power management. They're putting in completely new services. And of course, on the Hawaiian Islands, power is really, really important. And I've worked in that market for many, many years. So being efficient with power usage is critical based on what's available. as we mentioned, as HECO was mentioned, that's power utility. So this is a great project that you can look at. So when you're looking at Siemens and you're looking at having to deal with infrastructure, you're looking to have to deal with power management and control. Within the products that we actually develop and the solutions that we provide, we can look at any control scheme. There's a lot of different ways to do those control schemes. And no matter what market you're in, you're never going to see the same control scheme or demand side management requirements in each area. These areas are going to all have different rules. They're going to have different ways of deliver power, and they're going to have different ways that they can look at distributing this energy and capturing the data so that they can maintain efficient facilities. And that's really the point here. And when we address projects in specifically with either our end users or our developers or anybody that's doing these projects, these are really critical discussions that we have. And we see that having a consultative approach to discuss technology in the EV world, which is fairly new, it's very critical to have that experience that we have here in the marketplace. And I believe we'll wrap it up there. And if you have any questions for me, feel free to ask. And we look forward to engaging after this conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now I will ask speakers to turn on their webcam and we will start the Q&A. I think the first question I will ask is in regards, why invest in smart charging? How do we balance the upfront cost? I know when we talk about new technology or electric vehicles, we talk about the upfront cost, and then it saves money in the end run or throughout the lifetime. But if all of our speakers, and I will start with you, Annie, if you want to start us off with why invest in smart charging? How do we balance the upfront cost?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that to me and to many others, it seems quite clear that we are transitioning to electric transportation. It's maybe a question of how fast we get there, but it's not a question of if, it's a question of when, right? So all of these electric vehicles on our system are going to increase electric load. And I think that there is a responsibility that many utility regulators have already grappled with and accepted to figure out how we can minimize those costs to our electric system and to all ratepayers. We can, in fact, deliver benefits to all ratepayers if we manage load effectively, and that does, first and foremost, require smart charging, right? We need a way to manage load, to avoid peaks, to avoid bringing on new capacity to our system, and to really justify the ratepayer dollars that we're putting into EV infrastructure across the country. So yes, smart charging does have some additional upfront costs. I certainly recognize that. But when you look at long-term costs, that is really where we are receiving the benefits. If we're not investing in smart charging today, we're going to pay the price for that down the road.
Thank you. Eric, do you want to add anything to that, or Russ?
I'll quickly chime in. Is that number one, I absolutely agree on the greater scale, especially on the grid, especially. Having smart charging is going to be great because they essentially serve as DERs that will be essentially a resource that be called upon. I would just dwell a little bit more on multi-unit dwelling side overall for building managers and also for those who want access in home charging. It's important to have smart charging because it could lower the initial cost barriers, because it could essentially delay or avoid the unnecessary costs to upgrade electrical capacity in the building. And it could essentially, with smart charging, you can enlarge the number of ports or the number of parking spaces you can actually surface with smart charging technology. And also you can actually leverage the existing capacity that's already there. And all of those makes a really good business sense for buildings to provide these amenities at the first place to actually kickstart the overall adoption of EV passenger vehicles. And then lastly, as mentioned before, is that with smart charging technology, it also helps users and the site hosts to take advantage of incentives such as time of use rates or demand response that's coming from the utility. And all of those cannot be possible without smart charging technologies. Hence, that's why from the residential side, that's very important to have that.
Thank you, Eric. Ross, any input on that?
Yeah, I think smart charging is about education. And, whether you're a consumer or you are a industrial facility or government facility, having the proper education about what smart charging is going to do for you, and then making sure that you can connect via the networks. So, and getting that data out and then utilizing that data in a format that can actually result in a financial savings. As far as the grid and as far as feeding, I know that certainly load management is something that everybody wants to address, because you're going to have two types of facilities. You're going to have a greenfield facility, which is going to get a new service. Now you have the opportunity to have the correct service for the expansion of your EV fleet or your EV, all your EV charging infrastructure. I think we see the issue is in the brownfield style installations where you're installing with an existing service. That's where you're going to see load management play a very important role. So now, as a power distribution guy for many years, I would actually talk to the engineering firm and say, well, let's take a look in the future. If you have a certain size service and you're only going to install 4 EV charging spaces, what's going to happen when you have to install 50? You're going to have to eventually replace your service, and a load management and control system can only go so far. So I always encourage engineering firms to take a real hardcore look at what their incoming services, what their expansion possibilities are, and really make sure that the end user is aware that if they want to expand this, it's going to require some more power distribution expansion as well. So
thank you all. We have another question regarding incentives. What is the best way a state can incentivize an MUD owner to install chargers? So this is in regards to the policy side, or in regards to working with your MUD pilot projects, Eric. How can we see more incentives, or what are the best ways we could see the incentives for MUDs to install more chargers?
Yes, so to that specific question, I would point to a few of the existing cases that has been filed by a lot of utilities to their commissions regarding EV readiness, or you may call them the basic EV infrastructure that's actually going to help cover a lot of the costs for a charging station installation at MUDs. So essentially providing incentive to bring power from the power pole to a near receptacle or to a near place closer to the parking spaces is going to be a tremendous help or tremendous incentive to help building owners or building managers to really finish the final mile of putting in the charger, because that essentially will help cover most or majority of the costs of the installation. But at the same time, it's also expanding the revenue channel for the local utilities that they can actually recoup those costs as well, because you are extending those services into parking spaces to enable charging, which is another revenue maker. So states overall could actually be in a really good position to potentially incentivize those by mostly it's the commissions allowing utilities to invest in this area and actually basically flip the switch to enable home charging and make it much more easier for MUD owners or MUD buildings overall to access that power, which accessing power right now presents itself as a huge cost barrier.
If I can jump in too, I want to maybe put a finer grain on, what the types of incentives we're seeing, which ones we've seen be most effective. I wanted to point to the SDG&E program that I mentioned. on one of my slides, there SDG&E has taken the approach of owning and operating charging stations in multi-unit dwellings. I think that has been particularly effective because particularly in that market segment, what we really see are building owners or managers, wanting to press the easy button. What is the easiest way that I can get charging in my building where I need to make the fewest decisions and the project can be done quickly and simply. So I do think that emphasizing simplicity helps a lot with access. I think that someone might have also already mentioned building codes as well on this call. And so in addition to incentives, I just wanted to point to building codes as an effective and important way for getting charging stations, or at least EV ready criteria into new construction, including multi-unit dwellings.
I would just add, and those are all great topics, I would just add, building owners and developers are about the revenue. And when you look at a building, and depending upon what area you are and what utility allows you to do what we would call an electrical metering, sub-metering, building owners want to capture, we'll say, dead space that they're paying for electricity and be more efficient. I can see definitely in EV for multi-unit dwellings, and we're getting a lot of developers calling us, asking us how can we put EV chargers and then actually add it to the overall revenue stream with our tenants. And the reason why they're asking that is because in some markets, when you build a building, there's only one utility meter. So it's the responsibility of the owner to actually distribute that cost and that distribution of electricity to the tenants. So this is something that I've seen a little bit. There are some questions, and you get into, how do I connect my EV charger to the building infrastructure? Do I connect it directly to the resident and charge them through their panel, or do I charge it to do I connect it to the building meter? So there's all sorts of great discussions to have, and with the building owners, and actually incentives with the utilities.
Great. So our next question, if we're looking at our crystal balls right now and looking into the future, what should we, utilities, fleets, what should we be investing in smart charging today to be able to enable our V2G tomorrow? How should we be investing, or what should we be investing in currently? Do you want to start this one out? Or anyone can start.
Can you repeat that? Are you asking from the utility perspective?
Yes, I believe this is in regards to utilities and maybe fleet managers. Yes.
So fleet managers want to know what they should be thinking about if they want to deploy a fleet of charging.
Yes, what should they be investing in with regards to smart charging today in order to enable vehicle to grid tomorrow?
Can I start?
Yes.
Well, I would definitely start at the design, and I'm privy to working in some large fleet customers that want to electrify their fleet. And the problem that I see as being in this industry for many years is that the designs are not tight. There's a lot of questions that people like me look at and go, well, how am I going to provide this, and what am I going to provide there? And I would say, if I was a consulting to a corporation, is to have a very, very specific deployment design for the fleet, and understanding what vehicles you're going to have in your fleet and what styles of charging that those vehicles are going to require. Are they going to require plug-in? Are they going to require a pantograph style? Are they going to be indoor? Are they going to be outdoor? And then also designing with in mind, which we've talked about in this whole seminar, is load management. Where am I going to distribute the power, and when am I going to distribute the power there based on when the vehicles are going to actually be, we'll say, dwelled? Are they going to be dwelled overnight? So there's a lot of questions on the front end of your design that will determine the types of chargers, and the types of electrical infrastructure that you're going to need from the utility on down.
I guess I have my 2 cents there as well. When you're thinking about planning for a future that includes vehicle to grid, a couple of things to me come to mind. One is you want to be sure you're setting up a system that is truly flexible. So Ross mentioned Open Charge Point Protocol. I'm going to put in another plug for OCPP as a really core feature of any system. That is what enables you to have flexibility over time for both hardware and software, right? You can mix and match today. You can change things out in the future. You're not locked into any one vendor. As we see kind of the pace of technology changing, and as use cases change and what you want to be doing with your fleet of vehicles changes over time, that's a really essential ingredient to be thinking about. I also just want to say that there are a lot of really interesting opportunities that go along with vehicle to grid, but 90% of the benefits that we are going to get from electric vehicle charging and load management, in my opinion, are one way, right? Like we can get those benefits today through load management. So I tend to caution people not to get too hung up on vehicle to grid as the solution for load management. We've already got the solution at our fingertips with one-way managed charging.
Excellent.
Yes, and just to throw in my 2 cents as well, I would say V2G, especially seeing a lot of the real-world application that I've seen that's more on residential side that might speak a little bit towards fleet is number one, you really need to figure out the use pattern of your fleet vehicles. You really need to understand when will the car dwell to actually be able to manage the time that it feeds back into the grid. And all of those requires quite some research beforehand to understand where might be the availability for this storage capacity that you can actually provide for the grid so that you can actually make sure that you're monetizing it in a way that does not impact your operation. And then the other thing that I've seen a lot is mostly about what's the actual technology being applied for real world examples of V2G. Currently, I think the only standard in terms of plug that allows V2G actual implementation is the CHAdeMO ones. However, the CHAdeMO has been sort of the type of adapter that's sort of being put to the side by a lot of automakers these days. Yet CCS is talking about V2G technology coming 2025. So versus what's something that's already in place, versus something already in place, CHAdeMO that's sort of fading away by some automakers, and then CCS having technology coming in 5 years or so. It's essentially giving us a very uncertain future about where you should go to when it comes to vehicle selection. If you are trying to like sort of lock into something today, and I guess that goes back to our speaker's idea is that it's for just grid load management, we have the tools already, so we probably don't have to like be fixated about V2G, but V2G is definitely a super, super interesting idea that we should always keep an eye out. But I do think sort of the jury is still out on this one in terms of the actual best practice of implementation. So yeah, just that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. We have a question with regards to viable business models for smart charging currently available for low use environments. So in an area of low use and they're wanting to grow public access to charging, what would be the biggest operation cost? What would be the biggest concerns if we're looking at a low use area that wants to grow public charging? Eric? Would you like to take this first, or Annie?
I'm happy to take that one, Eric. And then if you have more to add, feel free to jump in. I think that public charging, it's essential to growing EV usage. Highly visible fast charging is what gives people the confidence to buy an electric vehicle when they can drive past EV charging and know that they will be able to, put electricity into an electric car if they buy it. So to me, that is, one of the things that I am pushing for most every day in my job. But the financial struggles are real, right? I think this question points to the fact that public charging stations, particularly DC fast charge or high power stations, have a real problem with demand charges. There are a few kind of ways that I think can make the economics a little more palatable for public charging. The first is addressing upfront costs, right? So healthy incentives both for make-ready and for charging infrastructure. Alternatively, I think that this is a really viable business model for utility ownership, especially in low utilization areas where we do definitely need EV charging to get the market off the ground. Maybe those are rural corridors or areas where we just haven't seen yet the level of EV adoption that we've seen in city centers, for example. To me, there is a real case to be made for utility ownership in those areas. And utilities, of course, have some different incentives for investing in EV charging compared to the private market. And Eric pointed to those earlier. And then in terms of operating costs, we've seen folks put forward and utilities put forward different solutions when it comes to rate design. I want to also put in a plug for really looking carefully at technology-enabled load management solutions in that setting as well. I pointed to the HECO example. In Vermont, Green Mountain Power has a pilot program that's looking at technology-enabled load management for public fast charging. But overall, I think it's an area where we really haven't done enough experimentation, and folks have been pretty quick to write it off. I'd like to see a lot more work in that area to help make the business case without having to do any sort of cost shifting through rate design.
I would agree on basically everything that has just been said. But and then on top of that, I would mention for most viable business model, I'm not sure if there is already, like I said, it's another topic that's kind of jury's out what is the best business model, because everybody is still trying to figure this out. And for low use environments, I do think DC fast charger to ensure the corridor is covered with energy delivery system is definitely a great idea. And from my very own perspective, I actually see with DC fast charger combined with energy storage there is actually a pretty good way to make sure the investment has a multifunctional purpose to it, because you're not just powering or connecting that specific spot to the grid using for just charging. At the same time, there's another potential DER that you can implement that with. That will be one way to alleviate a little bit of the business struggle for a very low usage environment. But yeah, it's very hard to really say what is the best or most viable route for business model, but that just might be one. And highly visible DC fast chargers serves as a assurance for people as well, like seeing gas stations along highway. So that's a really important factor for EV adoption that could potentially reverse the trend of low use environments in that specific area.
Thank you. And I think we have time for about one more question. And I will pose this to all of our speakers today. When we speak of managing charging load, what would you say, how would you say technology and rates fit together or act independently with each other? I will have to start this last round. I'll have you, Annie, go first, and then we'll do Eric and then Russ to close us out.
Sure, I'll try and be quick here since I know we're wrapping up. So I guess I'll just say that I see technology both as a complement to rate design and also an alternative to rate design. I think that the two can work well in some of the ways that I pointed to in my presentation. For example, smoothing spikiness around the use case. But we've also seen utilities choose to leverage technology over rate design to achieve some of those same effects. So complement and alternative is, I guess, what I'd leave you with.
I think you put it so perfectly that I'm not sure what else I can add, because I do think it's really like that. It's sort of a give and take sometimes, because depending on which one comes into the realm of the decision making for the utility overall, the preference could be a little bit different. But I do think with more technology options there, it's definitely allowing more flexibility for utilities rate design, because sometimes the rate design itself could potentially be impacting a much larger group of stakeholders who might not be directly involved or directly benefited by electric transportation yet. And all of those are grief burdens that a lot of consumer-owned utilities are trying to avoid, because they're trying to be a very prudent entity, which is something that I definitely respect. And with those technologies, those flexible technologies are allowing utilities who might not want to throw these cost burdens onto the ratepayers have another route or alternative to make sure that the technology will still be implemented in a progressive manner instead of unnecessarily burdening their ratepayers.
Oh, and those are all great responses. The technology definitely is related to the consumer. So we have to really be cognizant of who that consumer is that's getting delivered power. Is it a residential customer? Is it an industrial customer? So I think the rate design is definitely tiered based on who's actually receiving that power. The technology to get efficiencies out of power exists. Now it's uncovering what technologies that you use to make those rates applicable to any sort of process or any sort of consumer that's consuming that electricity, especially a big consumer. And those are the things that utilities that I've been involved in, they always have heartburn over. Now you have battery electric bus stations, and you have big ones, and they require multi-megawatts of power delivery. So how do you manage that? And those are, going back to what I said earlier, those are really, really important questions, especially when you're organizing a fleet, is to be very aware of what that consumption is. So the utilities are critical in that, and technologies. So they work together.
Thank you all so much. And we have the contact information here for all of our speakers today, as well as we'll be sending a recap email, which will have the presentation slides and the recording of this webinar today. So I want to say a big thank you to our speakers, Annie, Eric, and Ross, for joining us today and speaking on smart charging and some of the real world applications. And we hope you're able to join us, join Forth and Clean Technica in the celebration of National Drive Electric Week on Wednesday, September 30th. We'll be joined by Lordstown Motors, In Charge Energy, Chelsea Sexton, and Cox Automotive for an engaging webinar on light-duty electric trucks, our electric pickup trucks ready for the work. We'll get that answered and many more on Wednesday, September 30th. And again, thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope to see you on September 30th. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.